All right, I should be live. I just tripped on a child's chair and face planted on a slide. So I'm having a great entry here, but we're going to make it work. Welcome to another Monday night where we are going to discuss things that are happening right now regarding recent economic maneuvers and how they may reflect a desperate situation that we need to consider while everybody's panicking about a lot of the new revelations regarding some of the strategies of this administration. I was starting to think about why some of this would be happening outside of just the purvey of, people wanting to be imperialistic, let's just say. And I have some ideas that I want to present to you tonight that we can talk about referencing current news and current media that's basically reporting on some of these current events. And we can also talk about it in the sense of how things just work when it comes to running a government or organization, a business, and how we can apply it to this exact situation. So 5x5s are coming through. We have the Harbor Prepper here. We have Big Country and JD saying Oldsmobile 442, which I agree, they do sound and look great. Then we also have David Baise here and Mr. Lay and Phil with the 5x5s. Jet says 308 by 308, so I think we are good to go and we can get things started. Of course, I want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them. Get out here, do live streams, give you this information, some reasons for why you may want to keep preparing, and of course, they have a great assortment of gear and accessories that can help you be better prepared. So a big thanks to Midway USA. And we have 5x5 in Ghost Town, Canelo, Arizona from Mike H, which means I think we're ready to roll. Now, of course, the thumbnail tonight is big balls and desperate measures, and I think we're going to have some reasons for why later on in the chat. So stick around for that. First, though, I want to address some issues regarding the threat level and some of the Middle Eastern movements, okay? And that's just going to kind of segue us into the full-blown conversation tonight. But this was a newer revelation regarding those surface-to-air missiles that Iran had supposedly snuck into the country via their assets like Hezbollah, most likely, since they work so directly with the drug cartels in Mexico. And this was something I talked about back in September of 2024. And at the time, it was very hard to verify, but it was something that was brought up. And now this seems to be more verified at this point in time, and this was reported on just yesterday. So I want to go ahead and touch base on this, just so you can be aware of the fact that these things are likely real and they're here, and it's something that we have to consider as we prepare, understanding that these terror cells exist within the country and have access to this type of equipment, okay? U.S. President Donald Trump had to fly on a decoy plane at least once while on the campaign trail last year after law enforcement officials suggested that Iran had placed operatives with access to surface-to-air missiles inside of the United States, according to a new book. Tehran has repeatedly threatened to eliminate the president after he ordered the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani during his first term. Several other officials who served in the first Trump administration were also targets of the Iranian regime and received government-provided security details because of threats during the Biden administration. Last November, the U.S. Justice Department charged an Iranian man in connection with an alleged murder-for-hire plot to eliminate Trump while he was a presidential candidate. And that is something else we also reported on, also from September of 2024. So these are things that are all lining up timeline-wise to be in existence at the same period. Trump recently stripped these officials, including former Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and Brian Hook. Pompeo was his top diplomat. Bolton was his national security advisor, and Hook was Trump's special envoy for Iran. But he signed a memo last week to increase American pressure and sanctions on Iran, despite him saying he hated doing it. According to an upcoming book, Revenge, the inside story of Trump's return to power, Trump was increasingly concerned that agents of the Iranian regime would target him. Trump escaped 2 assassination attempts during his campaign against former President Joe Biden. Or was it Kamala Harris? I'm not sure anymore. While neither effort has been linked to Iran, Trump's team began to grow fearful of Iranian plots. As a result, the book's author says that his security team made him travel on a decoy plane owned by Steve Witkoff, who he later appointed as his special envoy for Middle East peace. Trump's private plane transported his staff, while Susie Wiles, who is now his chief of staff, went with him on Witkoff's plane. Many aides on Trump's jet didn't learn about the hush-hush plan until just before takeoff, when they realized Trump's window seat was empty, the author wrote in an article for Axios. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this particular situation, saying that this is, very selfish of Trump to put his staff on this plane while he's, more safe on another plane and everything else. But the consideration you have to make here is, first off, as a president, former president or current president, your security is always going to take priority over any of your staff or any of your family or anyone else. Like, your security is the number one priority, and you're going to be put in situations where other people's safety might have to be sacrificed in order to protect you. Hence why the Secret Service takes a bullet for the president, or is supposed to be able to, if they can get on a sloped roof. But regardless, this is one of those things, too, that you have to remember in these security situations that are very sensitive, where the information about somebody's movements are also very sensitive. You have to have very strict OPSEC, and you can't just tell the entire staff of the presidential wing of the executive group or the campaign or whatever it is that we're moving to a different plane because of a safety issue. Because somebody in that plane might be willing to talk to somebody else. So in order to have very good security, you can't just tell everybody exactly what's happening all the time, even if it puts their safety at further risk than the safety of the VIP. And that's just the reality of it. I know that might sound bad or cold, but that's just how things work. And unfortunately, if they were to move the entire staff into a different plane, I'm pretty sure someone would be able to figure out, hey, I guess maybe he's not on that plane anymore, right? So there's obviously risk involved, and there's strategies here. And one thing I'll just kind of mention as well is working for a president or a presidential candidate is inherently dangerous. It just is. You have foreign enemies and you also have domestic enemies, and there's a lot of threats and a lot of risks, and that is something that you take on by fulfilling those positions. So just be aware of that, but that's kind of the thing that's floating around, left-wing Reddit at this point in time, is that, look how narcissistic and, how selfish this person is by having his staff fly on a less secure plane, in order to, protect himself. That's just how it had to work in order to maintain OPSEC. That, it's just reality. Don't know what to say, but this is what's happening, which tells you that there really was a verified and real security threat that they were concerned about. Okay, now, according to the book, the Secret Service also organized a decoy motorcade the day Trump traveled on Witkoff's plane. During a September 18th rally in New York, the Secret Service said they had intel that someone, unclear if they had any affiliation to Iran or not, may have been planning to open fire at Trump's motorcade. The following week, the Secret Service used an electromagnetic gun to disable a drone above Trump's motorcade in Pennsylvania, the author said. No further details were provided. So this just is a reminder that the current environment is still hostile, and that there are assets here in our country that are willing to take kinetic actions against, the Trump administration or others who are associated with them. And as a reminder, anytime you're in one of these rallies, or if you ever find yourselves at political events, whether or not you're on the left or the right or whatever it is, if you're in a protest or anywhere that has a large gathering with a political affiliation of any kind, you are taking an inherent security risk in order to do so. And these people do exist, and they would love nothing more than to create additional chaos and instability here in the country. So these are things that you need to just remember and keep in mind as we start talking about some of these Middle Eastern initiatives, how they work into the Doge and big balls situation as well, and how this kind of, at least in my opinion, shows that things are worse than we currently know about, and that there are some red flags here for what I think is actually happening that I think is worth discussing. Mike H. comes in with the various fringe online outlets reporting Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro behind the July Butler attempt on Trump. Now, I did see that as well. However, like you said, fringe outlets, right? So there's not much verifiable information there. And even the information that does exist there, according to like the affidavit and everything else attached to it, doesn't necessarily have any kind of like smoking gun-esque evidence there. It just has a lot of loose affiliations and timelines. So I am interested to see how that evolves, and we'll see if there's any additional investigations there regarding federal involvement at the current time involving this new administration. But for now, I'm just going to kind of reserve my opinion on it just because I'm not sure, right? And we just don't know. Just because someone files a court case doesn't necessarily mean that the person who is being convicted of something, or at least accused of something, has actually done anything. So I appreciate you bringing that up, but I am kind of waiting to find out more information about it. So let's talk about more related to Iran. Today they had a massive celebration, celebrating their, revolution. And during that celebration, there was a mock Trump arrest, right? And it was kind of symbolic, but it also just reminds you of how tense the relations are in that part of the world. And we all know, and this is just how things are, but we know that there is a vested interest of war in the Middle East. I don't know if that's the same interests that align with our current administration or not, possibly based on some of the behaviors there. But regardless, we know that the military-industrial complex has that vested interest and wants that to occur. And every so often, you could see that some of these events could be spurred on by additional actions that may or may not be organic. So this is just a reminder of that to show where those tensions are and how the relations are currently going. And then we're going to talk about some more Middle Eastern stuff related to Israel and some of the actions happening there and how that could easily escalate into more involvement. And then we're going to talk about how all this kind of ties into this perfect little bow of why we might just be this desperate. So Iran stages mock Trump arrest amid report of Iranian sleeper agents in the U.S. So now this is tied together to what we just talked about regarding the surface-to-air missiles and everything else here in the U.S. and everything else going on actually overseas at this point in time. Iran's state-run Fars news agency, affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has aired a propaganda video depicting the mock arrest of President Donald Trump. The footage, reportedly filmed in Bandar Abbas, was broadcast on February 10th, 2025, and shows IRGC forces detaining a Trump lookalike. And yes, that's from today, and all the news is basically from this week, unless something is more historical for contextual purposes, and that's how we do things here. And of course, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button. That way you'll actually be notified of these videos and live streams in the future. And if you're on Replay Crew, you guys are amazing. Always check in the comments because I appreciate seeing you come by and say hi. It really does help motivate me. So, why it matters. While the mock arrest video is symbolic, concerns about real Iranian threats in the U.S. have grown in recent weeks. Some reports have suggested Iranian-backed sleeper cells may be active in the country, as outlines in the forthcoming book, Revenge: The Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power, right? So we just talked about that, and that's how this is all tied in. Now, in the video, a man dressed in Trump's signature Navy suit and red tie, wearing a mask resembling the former U.S. president, or current U.S. president, I would have written, is seen walking alongside an Iranian soldier. His body covered in chains. A person who appears to be a reporter questions the Trump impersonator, mimicking the scene of a perp walk. The video follows Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's recent declaration rejecting any negotiations with the United States over Iran's nuclear program. There should be no negotiations with such a government, said Khamenei on Friday. It's not clear what sparked Khamenei's remarks. However, they come after Trump suggested he was open to negotiating with Tehran, even while signing an executive order to reimpose his maximum pressure approach to Iran on Tuesday. The clip is also the latest series of provocative Iranian propaganda videos. In 2020, Fars released a similar video portraying an Iranian sniper assassinating Trump in response to the U.S. drone strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Iran's Quds force. That video, titled "Hey U.S., you started it, we will end it," depicted a sniper targeting Trump as he delivered a speech at a podium. Interesting choice of, I guess we'll just say, medium there, considering they used a video to emulate something that eventually happened, so nothing to see here, right? The Iranian threat. The FBI and Department of Homeland Security have previously warned about Iran's covert networks operating on American soil, particularly Hezbollah. The group, which has a long-standing tie to Tehran, has been accused of planning retaliatory attacks against Western targets. According to Eisendat's book, U.S. law enforcement officials had intelligence that Iranian operatives in the U.S. had access to surface-to-air missiles. Right. So that all keeps going through, but this is one of those things where we're basically demonstrating that Iran and the U.S. still don't have good relations right now. And in fact, they may be worse, which means that there's still a propensity for things to escalate further and turn into more of a crisis in the Middle East once again. Let's see here. The law of the minimum is asking if the terrorist group Zizians is real, and I don't know. So that's something I'll have to look into because I just don't know. And it is something that I will have to explore further in order to verify that. So let's see here. Nick says, dude, people, spot price of gold is going up every second now. Yes, it certainly is. We are going to talk about that as well, just because it kind of lines up with the overall discussion of tonight's concept regarding this desperate measure needed for our economy to not fully collapse. But before we get into that, let's talk about why the Middle East still has this possibility of becoming much worse. So, Trump apparently wants a ceasefire, or the ceasefire canceled between Israel and Hamas by Saturday if the hostages aren't released in full. Now, this is where things get interesting, because this whole thing started with Trump saying that they all better be released before his inauguration, which didn't occur And it's gotten worse because of the recent releases showing people who are gaunt, malnutrition, or whatever else. Malnourished is actually the right way to say that. But regardless, we also know now that they have paused the hostage releases based on the breaking of the ceasefire, but the ceasefire was broken by Israel. So now we have some real interesting things to consider that I want to bring up. President Trump issued an ultimatum to Hamas on Monday, saying Israel should cancel its ceasefire with Palestinian group unless every hostage it holds is released by Saturday at noon. Trump said if the hostages aren't released, all hell is going to break loose. Israel invaded the Gaza Strip, blah, 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 blah. We all know that. Listen, this is one of those things that can be a catalyst for more war in that region. And obviously, if you leave the decision to be made by those who are considered the aggressors, or I guess depending on how you want to look at it, we'll just say the terrorist organization, they are going to have to decide whether or not they want that war or if they want to concede. And either way, they lose power. So it puts them in a very bad position, but it also puts us in a tough spot because we can't just allow things to continue as normal if these threats are made and then nothing is followed up on if those demands aren't met. So we have some serious issues going on over there, especially because Trump is basically threatening to get involved with that scenario, saying all hell will break loose if those hostages aren't released by Saturday. But the reason that Hamas has stopped releasing the hostages, according to them at least, is because Israel has broken the ceasefire agreement. And if Israel has the power to just break that agreement, which causes Hamas to stop releasing hostages, then in many ways, Israel also has the power to force our involvement by now not allowing the hostages to be released by continually breaking the ceasefire deal. So you can see how this can escalate and spiral out of control very quickly based on who would prefer what outcome. And of course, we also had this information from recent history here back in January before Trump took office again, saying all hell will break out if Gaza hostages aren't released before his inauguration. So we have this information that we know already existed prior to this situation, and now the situation has escalated and become much worse. So this is just a consideration for you to be aware of the fact that the Middle East can still go hot at any point in time. Not to mention the fact that, like I said, Israel, according to Hamas at least, is breaking the ceasefire agreement, which is why they no longer are releasing the hostages, which was part of the deal. So whatever's happening there is what's happening there, but I'm just putting it out there in the sense of what people are accusing each other of. And of course, we also have this article here talking about how Israel's repeatedly violating the Lebanon ceasefire. Because if you don't remember, before Trump took office, Israel was bombarding Lebanon and trying to take out, different factions inside of Lebanon that were embedded there, and now they are continually still in the country, even though part of their ceasefire agreement was for them to withdraw. So just because Hezbollah's there, yes, they're in there trying to destroy Hezbollah, but they made a deal that they're not necessarily honoring. So this is how things can be pushed to that next level, even without our initial involvement, but then forcing us to have to decide between either following up on what we said we would or wouldn't do, or following up with our allies in the region based on their activities. That's why the Middle East is such a hotbed. It's never a good situation. Under the initial terms of the agreement that brought about a ceasefire between Israel and the Lebanese group Hezbollah in November, the former was to withdraw its forces from southern Lebanon by January 26th. That date came and went, but Israel has refused to pull back its military, and the deadline has instead been pushed to February 18th. Israel has also continued to sporadically bomb areas in Lebanon, to mass denunciations from the latter, claiming that it is targeting Hezbollah for violations of the ceasefire. So you can see how this goes back and forth. Now, Hezbollah is violating the ceasefire, so we're bombing them, which means now we're violating the ceasefire, which means the ceasefire just doesn't exist to begin with. The Israeli presence in southern Lebanon means that thousands of people still cannot return to their homes and border villages, with Israeli troops shooting at people who get too close. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, a Shia group that is the strongest military force in Lebanon, began on October 8th, right after all this stuff. So all this stuff is linked together to a degree and has that possibility of expanding. And so I wanted to touch on that first, to just show that, first off, we still have that terroristic threat here within the country. We still have threats against our current president and administration regarding those people that are involved with Iran and their proxies. And then we also have the Israel situation regarding Hamas, Israel regarding Hezbollah, and all the other regions of that area where they're militarily involved, having the full capacity to pull the U.S. into another conflict in the region with or without our best interests at heart, right? Because as we can see, these ceasefire agreements being broken are a great way to try to force our involvement based on, well, international pleas, as well as the fact that we're saying things. You better not allow this to continue, or else we're going to have to do something. And then somebody else having the ability to force those people to make it continue, right? And so that's a problem. And this is something that I find to be an issue. And it may be their desperate measure that they're taking in order to try to force our involvement to get their way, because our desperate measures have a different, from my point of view, a different goal in mind. And this is where we start pulling all this Middle East talk into where things are heading for us economically here in this country, and how personally I have tried to pick apart and figure out exactly what's going on with our current trajectory when we want to involve the Gaza situation, Doge, these new, sovereign wealth funds, the removal of things like the penny, not to mention the fact that we're now trying to block the Fed from creating a CBDC. There's a lot of things happening all at once, and to me it all points to one major indicator and one massive red flag. South Florida Doug, good to see you as well, glad you're here. And Dave C, just don't get it near heat and it's near indestructible. I don't know what you're talking about, but I have a feeling it's probably something very cool. So, what am I referring to, and what are these desperate measures? Well, the big red flag that hit me really hard at first and gave me some very strong recoil that I felt like I needed to do a little bit more soul searching about, including research, in order to get some more ideas about what this possibly could be for, right? Because at first it feels like expansionism and military interventionism within the Middle East once again. This is about the Gaza relocation plan mixed with the Gaza acquisition plan. And I'm looking at this originally and I'm thinking, well, this is dumb, right? Like, the last thing I want is for the U.S. to be involved in the Middle East in one form or another. I think that's most people's initial reaction, and rightfully so, I would say. The last thing I want is for us to take control of foreign territory when we don't even have control over our own country, in the sense of making sure our infrastructure is up to par, making sure our natural disaster victims have what they need, making sure our country is back on track before trying to do all these other little things like little pet projects out around the world. And so it feels like, interventionism mixed with military-industrial complex lobbyism and everything else related to that. And so I had to take a step back and say, listen, there's got to be something more here than just that, because that's so blatantly obvious and so, let's just say, unpopular with the people who put someone like Donald Trump into office, that there has to be more to this. And so I started trying to compile all this information together to really vet myself and my own biases when it came to figuring out what's going on here. And I think that I have at least a decent idea of what it is. And I think that it is not something I'm necessarily in support of still, but maybe something that those who have more information than I do and those who are more experienced than I am have decided maybe the only way out of this. And when I say the way out of this, what I mean is out of this economic death spiral we have been in for a very long period of time. And so let's get started with it so we can kind of build on this idea together to give you some ideas about what is happening, okay? And Dorian Gray says, we should commence with intense and unrelenting hand-waving to bring resolution and victory to the region. And I agree, and I'm very good at that, so I will volunteer to be in the front lines. So, analysis. Trump's Gaza relocation plan signals shift in Jewish political influence. Now, this is interesting as well, because this shows that there may be a rift there between the more traditional lobbying firms here in the U.S. that have a lot of power over our political appointees and the actual goals of this program. And I think that that's something worth considering, because regardless of whether or not you support, Israel, or if you have support for their different goals and everything else related to what they're trying to accomplish as a country, and regardless of whether or not you have any affiliations with that, you still, at least in my opinion, as an American, should prioritize America over any other country, regardless of whether or not it's Israel. That's at least my opinion. So, questioning why these major donor groups that usually get favorable treatment in this situation are suddenly seemingly making space between this initiative and their own goals should show that there could be reasons behind that, in the sense of an American priority versus what it is that's in their best interest, which I assume most people would be in agreement with, trying to put American priorities first. So let me get through this so you can kind of see where I'm going with this, okay? Reaction to President Donald Trump's radical proposal to have the United States take control of the Gaza Strip and relocate its 2 million Palestinian residents hinted at a realignment of Jewish political influence in which fringe Zionist activists and their ideas are replacing the establishment groups that have long held sway in Washington. Mainstream pro-Israel groups were perhaps stunned into silence. The Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations and the Federation movement had not issued press releases or posted on social media by Wednesday afternoon. AIPAC, the premier pro-Israel lobbying group, did not directly respond to the Gaza proposal. We appreciate President Trump's commitment to preventing Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon, the steps he has already taken to reimpose dramatic economic pressure on Iran, and his efforts to find a path forward for a post-Hamas Gaza, an AIPAC spokesperson said in an emailed statement Wednesday afternoon, failing to mention the acquisition of Gaza. Meanwhile, far-right politicians in Israel and American Zionist groups, previously seen as gadflies, exulted over headlines worldwide that seemed to be taking their approach seriously for the first time. Hashem exists or is a god was the initial reaction of Mort Klein, the longtime head of the Zionist Organization of America, who has sparked controversies and lawsuits at his own organization and the Conference of Presidents for years. This is too miraculous. Moshe Phillips, chair of little-known group Americans for a Safe Israel, meanwhile, issued a news release laced with incendiary language, saying Trump's takeover must include denazification of what he called Palestinian Arab society. If the Allies had merely rebuilt Germany after World War II without completely changing German society, it would have been only a matter of time before the Nazis would rise up and again threaten the free world, he said. That's exactly what President Trump needs to do in Gaza: change the schools, ban the terrorists, eradicate the symbols of terror, X, Y, and Z. Sarah Stern, president of EMET, a conservative think tank that focuses on the Middle East, said, after years of having to live with the abysmally failed land for peace paradigm, particularly regarding Gaza, it is about time for our foreign policy to establishment broke out of the mold. Unsurprisingly, the Jewish Democratic Council of America and the left-leaning group J Street were quick to roundly condemn the plan Trump unveiled at a Tuesday evening news conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But the American Jewish Committee was the first and one of the only nonpartisan traditional groups to react publicly in a lengthy statement that struggled to thread the needle between thanking Trump for his support of Israel and critiquing his Gaza takeover plan. President Trump sent a powerful signal of American support for its one Democratic ally in a region vital to U.S. national interest, the group said. At the same time, the president's surprising, concerning, and confusing comments on an American plan to take control and own Gaza and the relocation of its population raise a wealth of questions. First among them, the impact of the president's announcement on the ongoing hostage release agreement. Now, the reason I read that to you is to show that some of these more entrenched groups, especially here in our political arena, like AIPAC, aren't necessarily on board with this concept or idea. And in fact, a lot of the lobbying groups that are usually tied to the initiatives in the Middle East seem to be absent when it comes to a lot of their publicly spoken statements regarding whether or not they agree with this plan, which is partially why I think this plan may actually be primarily a necessity for what America's trying to accomplish. And I don't think what we're trying to accomplish is just merely prosperity and government oversight and lack of, or like more restricted budgets and everything else. But I think what we're trying to accomplish is not collapsing economically. We have been on the verge of economic collapse for years. We've talked about it in the prepper genre for the entirety I've ever ran this channel, as well as before I had the channel and listened to many other people within this community. Economic collapse has been on everyone's mind because this bubble just keeps growing. And as we know, especially related to the U.S. debt clock, that $36 trillion number isn't just going away. That's not something that you can just slowly chip away at. It has to be attacked aggressively, or else it will eventually force the failure of the dollar as well as the failure of our economy as a whole. Not to mention the fact that it will push us into a war, most likely, especially regarding the fact that the BRICS nations are removing themselves from the necessity of the dollar, especially regarding the petrodollar. So we have a lot of things to consider here. And the fact that a lot of these groups over in Israel, or at least here in the United States, that advocate and lobby for Israel aren't actually aligned with this concept should give you some room to pause to say, okay, if they're not actually wanting to see this happen, what is the main goal at hand? Why is this happening? Because like I said, originally and still to this day, I'm very skeptical, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be involved over in that area. But I had to try to take a step back and say, why would this happen? Why would we actually want to do this? And there's very few opportunities in modern times for a country to acquisition what basically comes down to another country, to acquisition land. So when we start talking about Greenland, when we start talking about Canada even, when we start talking about Gaza, you start realizing that this is a portfolio that might be required to generate additional economic wealth to avoid a catastrophe that's looming and has been looming for decades on end. And then you also have to consider the fact that there's another piece of this equation, okay? So let's talk about Doge and big balls for a second, because I want to present this entire concept to you as a whole package so you have a better understanding of why this might be occurring, okay? So let's get into how we're trying to save money and why that's so important in this fight towards staving off an economic collapse as long as possible while trying to recuperate from it as well. What is Doge, right? And of course, we all know what big balls are, but we need to find out what Doge is. What is Doge? Here's what to know about Elon Musk's latest cost-cutting efforts. This is from today, and this is what's being reported today by the mainstream at least, which, is what it is. The White House's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, was created by President Trump on January 20th with a mission to slash federal spending. Since then, the task force led by billionaire Elon Musk says it has saved more than $1 billion by canceling diversity, equity, and inclusion contracts, among other expenses, according to Doge's social media account. But since kicking into gear on January 20th, Doge has also prompted several lawsuits and raised alarms from Democratic lawmakers and consumer advocates after it gained access to the Treasury Department's payment system, which stores personal data for most Americans. Supporters of Doge see its efforts as a way to rein in bloated federal spending at a time when the nation's outlays are outpacing its tax revenue, causing the federal debt to spiral to an all-time high of $36 trillion. Mr. Trump has said he wants to cut programs that don't align with his policies and to slash the federal workforce. Doge is trying to stop your tax dollars from being stolen for waste and fraud, Musk posted on his X social media app on February 4th. Critics of the task force say that Musk, who runs companies including SpaceX that receive billions in government contracts, could be engaged in work through Doge that may pose conflicts of interest with his private businesses, such as potentially gaining access to data about other competitors' federal contracts. And you know what? That might be true. But one thing that I will say is that they're trying to use this concept of Americans' taxes and personal information being, private as a reason for why these people shouldn't get access to these systems. But that's not mentioning the fact that there's other people who already had access to these systems for those exact same reasons. So I don't necessarily understand why it should matter for one or the other based on what security clearances. But all I know is when I send the IRS thousands of dollars at the end of the year, or at the beginning of the year, I guess is when I do it, we give them all of our information, and they also know exactly how much money I made and everything else related to everything I do ever. So that's just how this works, I guess. But here we are, okay? Now, what is the point of this, right? The idea here was me to just demonstrate that they are trying to save us money. And the money that they're saving us is, well, let's just say it's good, but it's not going to save us. And when I say that, what do I mean? So, like I said, they've saved $1 billion based on getting rid of DEI initiatives and programs of that sort, right? But $1 billion is nothing compared to what it is we actually need. Now, here is the national debt clock currently. And Doge supposedly is already at the point of slashing $80 billion from federal spending. So that's a good start for sure. And it is outpacing the national debt technically, but how fast and how long can it keep up for? There's only so much slashing you can do. Now, here's why I want to go ahead and bring this up really quick. The Gaza acquisition really had thrown me off, right? I'm like, I don't like this at all. And then we also have the situation with Greenland. And then we have all the talks of Canada. We have tariffs, some new ones that just came out today, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And I start thinking about what is going on here. But then I go back to what I know about, right? So I think that's something most of us do. We fall back on our knowledge base, our experience, right? And so yes, am I a prepper? I run a prepper channel? Of course I do. Am I a regular guy who decided it was a good idea to start putting away extra supplies and learning about some of the threats that occur in the world that could affect us directly as Americans? Yeah, that's me. I'm a regular person. You're right. I did not get a college degree in shtf prepping. Should have probably, but you know what? I just wasn't able to do so. But I have run a lot of businesses, and I also have a, let's just say, mathematical mind, right? Like if I had to choose a subject that I excel in more than other subjects, math would definitely be the one. So what does that mean, at least to a certain degree? It means that I've learned over the years how businesses operate. And if you look at the US government as a business, which you should, because everything still applies when it comes to economic standards of if you have money, you do, and if you don't, you don't. Well, one thing I've learned over the years, and I made a whole video about this years ago that you might want to look into, but I got actually a lot of flack for that video because I think that the main takeaway from it wasn't necessarily received properly. But you can't save your way out of failure. And so what does that mean? So when a business is in the red, which we currently are, 36 trillion in the red, right? So every month your business is losing money. And so you're trying to figure out how to fix it. And so you start going through your P&Ls, your profit and loss statements, right? And you're looking at each little individual compartment of what you spend your money on. And you say, hey, you know what? We spent $2,000 in electricity last month. We need to be a little bit smarter about using electricity. We're going to cut that down. And now we're only spending $1,500 a month on electricity. Awesome. We saved $500. Great. Does that $500 you save get your business out of the red and in fact put you into the green and start moving you forward in a positive trajectory? No, it doesn't at all. In fact, all you did was probably hurt yourself in the sense of trying to move forward, because whatever you're cutting back on to save that $500 worth of electricity was stuff you probably needed to move your business forward. We can also apply it to staffing. Hey, labor is the most expensive part of running most small businesses, right? Trying to pay somebody to do a job is very, very expensive. So how do I save money because my business is in the red and I need to show better numbers? I'm going to cut back on labor. What happens when you cut back on labor? Well, I got rid of one of the extra people I usually have on staff. Let's just apply this to a coffee shop. So I have 2 baristas working, usually making coffees every morning. Now I'm not making any money. I'm in the red. I've been running the business the same way, but at the same time, this 2 barista thing is too expensive. So what am I going to do? I got to cut a barista. Okay, now I'm saving, 50% of the labor I used to spend. Excellent. Now I'm finally in a position where I can start making money again. But the problem is that now when you actually have people walk in the door to order their coffees, you only have 1 barista. You no longer have 2. So now you can't make any money because that barista is too slow. She can't take orders and make your drink at the same exact time, or he's not able to get out there and start restocking any of the retail stuff you have in the store because he's stuck behind the counter taking orders and making coffees all day long. So you have this one barista that's, yes, saving you money, but you're losing sales in the process because you can't actually provide the customer with the service or the speed or the product that they were hoping to acquire. So they walk in the door, that guy's too busy, that girl's too slow, I don't know, but I don't have time for this because I thought I could get a coffee in 10 minutes or less and I can't. I'm leaving. Now you didn't make the sale, but you did save money on labor, but now your sales are down even further than what they were before when you started this cost-saving initiative. And this is the story of a lot of small businesses that I've tried to help over the years that never listen to me and then eventually fail. So because of that, I'm applying this knowledge that I have, at least from my experience, to this scenario and realizing that we cannot cut costs to save this economic death spiral we're currently in. You will not be able to cut enough spending or enough cost to get out of $36 trillion of debt. The only feasible way to save a business that's failing isn't to save money. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's to spend money, and at the same time, the only real way is to get more sales, to have more cash flow, to increase the amount of money that can be earned through that business, or else you might as well just close the doors and cut your losses now. So in my opinion, based on the current situation, based on what we're seeing, you obviously are going to save money where you can because that's going to help slow the collapse, basically, right? You're going to slow your business having to close by saving some money so you're not losing as much every single month. But you can't stop the collapse from happening or stop the business from closing unless you increase the sales, increase the income, increase the cash flow, and start bringing money in the door. And I think what we're seeing here is an attempt from this administration to slow this economic collapse down by saving money while in the process trying to acquire a portfolio of asset and income generating property that's going to maybe start cutting away at the national debt. And that's the only justification and the only reasonable and logical approach I can see why this would ever be even tabled as an idea, because otherwise it's completely illogical. So if this is the only approach, and from the people who are smarter than me, that are economists, that have their degrees in, macroeconomics and everything else that I don't actually have, and have all this information, like someone, I don't know, like Elon Musk, who runs 17 different businesses and has billions of dollars in assets all over the country and in space, maybe those people have a better idea than I do about the only way to actually correct this course being to generate money rather than to just save it. And that's been my experience and my understanding for my entire career. And it's the truth. And it is the truth. Like, there is no avoiding it. Every time a business starts cutting costs in order to try to stay profitable while losing money, they eventually go under. You have to increase sales. You have to put more money into marketing and more money into staffing and more money into your equipment and everything else to be more efficient, to make things better in order to give people reasons to spend money with you, right? And so think of that while we keep moving forward in this conversation. But I wanted to drive that point home because, like I said, it's something I actually have experience with, which I can apply to this concept and maybe build some understanding, at least personally, and hopefully for you as well, as to why this could be occurring. Because if we want to apply it to things like, I don't know, the U.S. Sovereign Wealth Fund, it starts to make a lot more sense why all this is happening at the same time, doesn't it? How a U.S. sovereign wealth fund is coming and how others work, okay? And this is from today. And this is from Barron's, and I think, wait, hold on a second. This isn't the article I wanted. Somebody got me here. Sorry, we were on Forbes before. Nope, we're not now. I'll pull it back up. Don't worry about that. But regardless, I want to make sure that you guys are on the same page as me, so when we move forward with these different concepts, that we are all in agreement at least of what it is we're discussing, okay? Pop this in really quick. Of course, we're not going to find the article that I had pulled up originally. That's just how it works for me. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll go ahead and talk about big balls instead for right now, because also I think it's a good idea. It also makes me laugh. So Doge, obviously, going through this whole deal, is creating quite the freak out over big balls. But here's something I want to keep in mind. Like I said, we're trying to save money and cut costs. I think that's a good thing. The federal government's too big. We have too many bureaucracies. There needs to be less money spent on it. And another guiding concept, at least in my opinion, is that if the government has enough money to give money to other countries or to give money away or to support other initiatives in any other place other than America, then they have too much money. And that means we're being taxed too much. If you have money to give away, I don't need to give you any more money. And that's the frustrating part about, the people who voted against my elimination of property tax here in North Dakota, is that the state has a surplus of money. So the state makes too much money, which means they're taxing too much, which means we don't need to be taxed on property tax because the state has enough money anyway. And instead, everybody still voted to keep property tax because, I don't know, I guess, how will there be schools or how will there be roads? As if those things didn't exist before all this. But whatever, it's fine. They probably live in apartments and weren't even considering the fact that their landlord still pays property tax even though they don't, and that means their rent will still probably get higher. So whatever, what do I know? Regardless, here is the information about big balls and Doge that I wanted to share too, because something I don't think was necessarily well reported on regarding this situation was the need for immediate course correction and the need for these young startup engineer types who have the ability to program algorithms and the ability to put together software that can automatically start running through these systems in order to indicate whether or not there's fraud or indicate any type of red flags regarding transactional histories that don't make sense for what it is the government should be funding. They went in there and started wrecking house immediately, which showed us why Doge was able to put together $80 billion in savings already when it comes to government spending. And I think that we're going to see more of that. But the thing is that the media now is losing it because somebody used the big balls gamer tag in their past. And it also has started to demonize these people because of their age, which I also find very interesting. Because I don't care how old somebody is and I don't care what their credentials are if they're capable of doing the job at hand at the highest level. And some of these people are... You can be 19 and be smarter than me and more capable than me at this particular job all day long, and I'll never argue that, okay? Now, if somebody's 9 years old, I'm going to say that's probably a bad idea. But at 19, we're willing to put people into the military who we are then willing to put on the front lines of a conflict and willing to put in harm's way and possibly die for their country because at 19 they're capable of that. But according to the media, as well as certain people in certain political parties, being 19 doesn't qualify you to actually do anything within the government. So I'm confused about how that's supposed to work, but I guess that's where we're at, okay? President Donald Trump's administration deepened its pressure campaign on government employees to resign before a Thursday deadline, rattling and angering a civil service steeling itself for a prolonged battle with Elon Musk and his ongoing foray into the federal bureaucracy. Reads a New York Times lead on the buyouts. The deadline is today when federal employees may decide to voluntarily leave and be paid through September 30th, which probably just should take that. Honestly. Trump's gut-it-all plan for D.C.'s deep state, reads an Axios headline, noting that Trump promised during his campaign to root out the deep state, generally framed as an institutional resistance in D.C. that impedes his agenda, and lamenting that the speed and tactics of Trump's vengeance-fueled cost-cutting efforts have been surprising. A longer, more alarmist political feature posits, I don't use that word ever, posits that the widespread political purges of the early 1950s echo clearly today, and that 70 years ago, the reasonable pretext of hunting Soviet agents opened the way to a years-long paranoid campaign motivated by outlandish conspiracy theories that destroyed countless careers but did nothing to improve America's security. Meanwhile, Wired is attempting to drum up opposition for the team of young and talented engineers Musk has hired to help him cull the federal government computer systems of waste and inefficiency. Note the deference to experts here, which I agree is always a deference. Experts question whether Edward Korestein, a Doge staffer who has gone by big balls online, would pass the background check typically required for access to sensitive U.S. government systems. I guess, right? Like, this is just an adult American who's trying to work for the government. So for some reason, they may not pass a background check, but the people who are in there doing shady deep state stuff did. So here we are. I'll grant that everyone's playing their part perfectly. It's not like these publications were going to welcome the Elon Musk-helmed Department of Government Efficiency, heralding the cuts as some huge accomplishment, though the Wire used to seemingly be on the side of engineers. But as Hoover Institution economist John Cochran told Zach Wesselmuller and me yesterday on our show, Just Asking Questions, it's not really about the cost savings right now. Something more symbolic is happening here, where Trump, ever a showman, is bringing everyone's attention to the rampant government waste that we've come to accept as standard, which I agree should not be acceptable. Trump should do this via the proper mechanisms, and he should respect constitutional limits on his power. So far, he has not done a good job of that. But the gutting of the federal government and cutting it down to size should not be reflexively opposed. Perhaps people should instead feel disrespected when their taxpayer dollars are used to fund diversity, equity, and inclusion workplace initiatives in Serbia, even if it's just a drop in the bucket. But many of these things are a third-rail issue for liberals. Defund NPR, writes Musk in a representative tweet. It should survive on its own. Over here at Reason, we've been beating this drum for a while. Musk has said publicly in the last few days that he intends to make rapid safety upgrades to air traffic control following high-profile aviation disasters. And Musk's team was also spotted at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where they obtained access to the agency's computer systems to search for programs and staff tied to diversity policies that the Trump administration has vowed to stamp out. Okay, so what's really going on, basically, is that they're going through and they're gutting all these different institutions. They're gutting all these different programs and policies, and they're trying their best to save, and they're going to use the fact that we have people like big balls on this team, people that are young engineers that don't have the extensive political backgrounds of some of these other inherent swamp creatures, as ammunition for why this is a bad thing and why this is not something that anybody should root for and why it's something that is problematic as a whole. And to me, at least personally, I just see cutting spending as being good no matter what. So get rid of it. Sure, should we invest more into federal aviation if they're having all these issues? Yeah, that makes more sense to me. Infrastructure matters, and we need our infrastructure to be strong and secure. First off, it's highly targeted by foreign adversaries, and second off, we need it to operate well so that we can have a strong economy, because you need things like airplanes to not fall out of the sky to build consumer confidence in using these products and infrastructure systems. So we need to invest some money, but that money doesn't need to be added to the pot. It needs to be taken from these things that aren't useful and put into things that actually matter. Now, this is where things get interesting, okay? So, we are working on this sovereign wealth fund situation, which I find very interesting, and I think it's something that, well, is probably a good idea, but it's also something that gives you an idea as to what we're doing moving forward, okay? because we are clearly worried about why these things are needed, okay? And this also goes into the idea of buying TikTok, which is another thing that wasn't necessarily on my bingo card, but is something that I think likely needs to happen. So, just a reminder, we did talk about this already, but things have developed since then, which makes it more applicable, okay? The federal government is going into business. See what I'm saying? Like, that's the first line of this article. President Donald Trump on February 3rd signed an executive order establishing a sovereign wealth fund to, as he stated, promote the long-term financial health and international leadership of the U.S. America's new sovereign wealth fund is either a feasible idea to invest strategically or a giant opportunity for waste, said Tufts University Patrick J. Sheena at the conversation. Such funds are usually associated with great wealth, especially in oil-rich countries like Norway and Saudi Arabia, which created Live Golf using its fund and are generally used by those countries to invest in projects of strategic interest. But how those funds are built and how they are used varies from country to country. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment fund that manages a country's financial assets, said Kiplinger, a sister site of the week. Countries can take surplus revenues from exports, taxes, or other sources, like tariffs, and invest them either to achieve long-term economic stability or, more controversially, to finance political or diplomatic priorities that can work as a form of soft power when the country is trying to grow its global influence. And the funds can buy just about anything. For example, China uses one sovereign fund to finance power and transportation projects in Africa. So, that is why I honestly believe what we're witnessing is the portfolio building of said sovereign fund. And the fact that it may be required for us to dig ourselves out of this hole. I don't want additional Middle Eastern interventionism. I don't want more conflict in anywhere that has a desert. I don't want us to have any more military-industrial complex-driven wars. But I don't want us to have an economic collapse either. And we've been kicking this can down the road for a very long time. And I don't think this is about peace in the region. And I don't think this is about trying to establish, some kind of lovely neighborhood in Gaza for, affluent folks of Israel to vacation in. The more I've thought about it, the more I've come to believe that this is strictly an economic development program that is a do or die scenario. If we don't do something drastic to change our current trajectory, we are going to fail economically as a nation, which, by the way, is one of my top 5, shtf scenarios as a prepper. An economic collapse is not fun for anyone. Living like Venezuela would not be good for America. We would fall apart very quickly, as we have seen over the last 4 years in some of our more liberally driven major cities, where street takeovers, riots, looting, and flash mob crime has become a regular event. That's going to be the entire country during an economic collapse. And it's very hard to recover from one. You don't really usually ever actually recover. You generally find yourself with some sort of regime change or something else along those lines. So what I'm assuming, based on everything we just talked about, is that we are building an economic portfolio to save this country from that exact fate. And if that's what's happening, I can understand more, and I could probably get on board more with some of these initiatives. I need more verification and validation of that exact strategy being the root cause of these actions before I can just be all gung-ho for it. But logically, especially based on our current president's background and history, I think there's an understanding there that this is the only way forward, and maybe that the Gaza situation isn't like it wasn't necessarily chosen, but was an opportunity that came up. An opportunity arose to acquire a nation state, basically, and renovate it and flip it like you would a house, right? You buy a house in a crappy neighborhood, and then you rebuild it and remodel it, and then you sell it for 2 or 3 times its value. Like, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I think that's what we're witnessing. So, there's more evidence of such a thing happening regarding these tariffs, and now the tariffs have actually expanded. In case you didn't see this, I just wanted you to be aware of this, because this is going to affect us directly. And I've said this before, but I want to reiterate it. The tariffs and everything else, if they can lead to a lack of income tax, I can get on board with things being more expensive because I get to decide then if my money is being well spent on those more expensive things. Hey, you know what? This thing that's made out of aluminum costs more now, but you didn't get taxed on your money. So if you want to buy it, it's going to cost more than it used to. But if you want to just save your money, you have more money than you used to. So I can get on board with that, right? I can understand that. But I need to see this income tax thing come to fruition if we're going to keep making things more expensive, which is only temporary, at least in my opinion. The idea of tariffs is that they're a temporary situation that eventually levels out, right? Because there's still only a certain point where the consumer will purchase something at a certain price point. So you have to maintain some level of, let's just say, reasonability when it comes to how expensive things can actually get. And then that is where, additional markets come into play and competition starts to come into play and everything else. But regardless, this will affect us directly. So you have to be prepared for this. As someone who is prepared for other things, be aware of hey, if I need to get something done that's going to include steel or aluminum or anything like that, maybe I want to get it done sooner than later. Maybe I want to beat the idea of it going higher in price. Or maybe I want to hold off until things stabilize to a certain degree, or until there's a reason why there might be more money in my pocket, aka possibility of getting rid of an income tax, right? Trump raises tariffs on aluminum, steel imports in latest trade war salvo. Okay. Trump raises aluminum tariffs to 25% from 10%. So don't forget what is made out of aluminum. Just about, a large majority of things in my gun safe right now are made out of aluminum. Something I consider. I mean, it's either 60-61 or what is it, 70-66? I always screw that one up. But regardless, there's a lot of that in there. Section 232 proclamation ends exemptions, exclusions, quota deals. Trump targets downstream steel products for tariffs. Pledges to add multi-front trade upheaval. Trump also promises broader reciprocal tariffs. President Donald Trump moved to substantially raise tariffs on steel and aluminum imports on Monday, canceling exemptions and duty-free quotas from major suppliers Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and other countries in a move that could boost the risk of a multi-front trade war. Trump signed proclamations that raised the tariff rate on aluminum imports to 25% from the previous 10% that he imposed in 2018 to aid the struggling sector. His action reinstates a 25% tariff on millions of tons of steel imports and aluminum imports that had been entering the U.S. duty-free under quota deals, exemptions, and thousands of product exclusions. The proclamations were extensions of Trump's 2018 Section 232 national security tariffs to protect steel and aluminum makers. A White House official said the exemptions had eroded the effectiveness of these measures. Trump will also impose a new North American standard requiring steel imports to be melted and poured and aluminum to be smelted and cast in the region to curb imports of minimally processed Chinese steel into the U.S. So, that's another revenue source for this sovereign wealth fund if needed, right? We're now at the point where we're trying to make money rather than just save money, because you have to do both. And like I said, previously people got upset at me about that idea in a video I put out because their thought process was, you're telling people not to save money, right? And that wasn't my thought process. My thought process, that wasn't the message I was trying to convey, at least. The message I was trying to convey was, you can't save enough money to not be homeless if you just don't make enough money to pay your bills, right? Yes, not spending unnecessarily is a good idea, especially if you're in a dire economic situation. But if you make $1,000 a month and your bills are $1,200 a month, you literally can't save enough money to pay all your bills. It doesn't matter how much you save at that point. You're still only going to pull in $1,000 a month and your bills are $1,200. So therefore, you're negative $200 every month, no matter how much money you save off that $1,000, because the only way you're saving money off your $1,000 is by not paying your bills, which is what we're doing in the United States right now. Our bills are higher than the money we earn, aka we're not paying the bills because you can't. And then any money you save still isn't enough to pay your bills. So that's what the message was there, just so everybody knows. Silent Guard, can you make a poll asking who feels like they have what they need to survive 30 days? Well, sure. Why not? Let's make a little poll here, okay? Let's see if I can do this very well. Oh, I was going to say that completely wrong. And there you go. Start the poll. Haha. Because why not? Seems like a fun time. And, while we're doing these things, make sure you guys hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe, do all the stuff, because I'm really bad about saying that and I need to be better at it. So, a couple of things I want to touch on real quick here. First off, we're getting rid of pennies. Be aware this is gonna spiral into more currency. And this is concerning for a lot of people. I think it's an inevitability, unfortunately. Even though I like cash, I think that regardless of my opinion or feelings on it, things are going to go away based on this basic concept. It costs more to make a penny than a penny's worth. Donald Trump says he has ordered the U.S. Mint to stop making pennies, which he correctly says cost more than 1 cent to produce. For far too long, the United States has minted pennies, which literally cost us more than 2 cents. This is so wasteful, he said in a post on his Truth Social platform. Let's rip the waste out of our great nation's budget, even if it's a penny at a time. Trump actually undersold the cost argument. Pennies cost more than 3 cents to produce. But there's a problem with his plan. Phasing out the penny could result in needing to make more nickels, and the U.S. Treasury Department loses far more money on every nickel than it does on every penny, which, by the way, is why it's illegal to melt down nickels, because if you melted down nickels, you would make money off every nickel you melted down. So that's why these things are illegal to do, because otherwise people will just buy all the nickels they could find and melt them all down. Now, this is also somewhat asinine in my opinion. I don't think that people are going to just suddenly need nickels because pennies go away. I think that this is just a cascading effect of eliminating coin change to a point at all. Like it's going to start with pennies. It's going to go to nickels because that's the same exact line of thought. And then dimes are pointless that nobody uses anyway. And then quarters might like hold out for a little bit longer. But then it's all going to go away, including cash. It just sucks, but it's true. And I don't know what else to say. But there is some truth to the idea that making a penny for more than a cent doesn't make sense either. So I don't know exactly what the right answer is, but this is what's happening. I mean, going to a precious metal backed standard would probably be a good idea, but what do I know? And speaking of precious metals, by the way, gold has hit crazy high prices, just so you know, okay? Why did I show that? Oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to. But now you know, Nick, I still like you. Gold hits new record. Trump's tariffs, inflation fears drive safe haven surge, okay? So gold is up to $2,950 right now. Like, it's insane. Spot gold rose to as high as $2,938 per troy ounce on the New York Mercantile Exchange, rising as much as 1.7%. Gold will, in my opinion, hit $3,000 at any point in time now, right? That's not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just saying I have a feeling that's probably going to happen. It's true, though. Like, we are in a weird spot when gold is running that high. And everyone will say this, and I'm going to say it for you. It doesn't mean gold is going up. It means the dollar is going down, right? Gold being worth $3,000 an ounce just means the dollar is worth less. Accurate, at least in my opinion. So keep that in mind. Another reason why pennies and everything else might not be worth doing anyway, especially if we need something like gold to pull us out of this hole. And we also have legislation being introduced to prevent the Federal Reserve from moving to a central bank digital currency. So I don't think that the plan is to get rid of all the pennies and get rid of all the cash just to move it into a CBDC. At least I think they're trying to prevent that plan from occurring. I think that the real initiative here is to move things just to crypto assets in general. I don't know if that's the right answer. I don't know enough about crypto to be able to tell you much about it other than the fact, I know enough about it to understand it from my own personal reasons, but not enough to tell anybody else about it because I would feel foolish compared to other people out there that are way more knowledgeable than me. But what I will say is that because of Trump's push for crypto assets and because of his administration's positive outlook on crypto as a whole, I think that they are trying to get rid of the fiat cash and make it so the Federal Reserve can't force you into their digital currency while also giving you somewhere else to go financially via currency that's decentralized to a degree that might have more of a future. This kind of seems to be what's lining up based on this particular information because this was put out February 6th, right? So this is new legislation being introduced. Mike Lee from Utah introduced the No CBDC Act to prevent the Federal Reserve from reshaping the U.S. financial sector and having the ability to monitor consumer transactions through a central bank digital currency. President Donald Trump recently banned federal agencies from creating a CBDC through an executive order. This legislation would enshrine the ban permanently in law. It is co-sponsored by Senators Ted Cruz and Rick Scott in the Senate. Rep. Andy Ogles is introducing the House companion bill. The United States doesn't need to create a central bank digital currency to know it is a bad idea, said Senator Lee. We've seen this play out in China and with the digital yuan. In early trials, China canceled its citizens' money after a set period, forcing Chinese citizens to spend their savings at the compulsion of the government. My bill protects Americans from a similar intrusion by prohibiting the Federal Reserve or any federal government agency from minting or issuing a CBDC, whether through a direct-to-consumer or an intermediated model. Okay, so I find that interesting in coordination with the price of gold, the removal of pennies, then to nickels and to everything else, and stopping the Federal Reserve from doing the CBDC that everybody's been so concerned about. So I don't know if that's a positive move, but I do know that it seems like this is all interconnected in the sense of like a greater scheme. And I also wanted to just touch base here really quick on what the Federal Reserve believes in regarding CBDCs, okay? CBDC is generally defined as a digital liability of a central bank that is widely available to the general public. Today in the United States, Federal Reserve notes, i.e. physical currency, are the only type of central bank money available to the general public. Like existing forms of money, a CBDC would enable the general public to make digital payments. As a liability of the Federal Reserve, however, a CBDC would be the safest digital asset available to the general public, with no associated credit or liquidity risk. So as you can see, they're very supportive of the concept, and the current, Republican side of the government is trying to forbade them from being able to do it. So I find it all to be very fascinating, and I think that there is a strategic plan in place to mitigate some of the financial risk with this digital transition that's just going to occur whether or not we want it to, right? Like now in this period of time is not the time to be a Luddite. Now is the time to embrace things that are moving forward technologically and learn what you can about them so you can adapt to that new environment when it becomes reality. Because it will become reality even if we don't want it to. Even if we don't like it or believe in it, they're not going to ask my opinion on what I'd like to see happen. It's just going to happen. And if I'm not, mentally prepared or educationally prepared for how to adapt to that new environment, then I'm going to lose out or I'm going to fall behind or whatever else you want to put into that phrase work. So this is just my opinion. But I think, at least in my opinion, which is all I ever have, I guess, apparently, what we're witnessing right now is the beginning of this sovereign wealth portfolio, this fund. And Gaza, Greenland, possibly Canada, the tariffs, everything else is all part of that greater plan to start America to generate enough income, generate enough revenue to finally actually attack the debt rather than just slowing it down. Because all saving money can do, all these Doge cuts, as good as they are and as much as they're needed, all they can do is slow down the inevitable collapse if we don't do something about it. So as they slow things down to buy themselves a little more time, we're building this portfolio that may be the last-ditch effort or a desperate measure of an administration who understands that we're right on the edge of this cliff. And if we go over the cliff, it's over. You can't come back from an economic collapse. Like it's a different country at that point, right? And yes, this can backfire. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is not without risk. I'm saying I think this is the most reasonable and logical reason for why this is happening, but I do believe there is still a lot of risk involved. And if you want any historical context for that, look at ancient Rome. When they were in economic troubles, they started, conquering lots of land and trade routes and trying to establish themselves as the economic powerhouse of a certain region and taking over resources and any other way to generate income to stave off their own economic collapse. But in the process, they spread themselves too thin and eventually weren't able to save the country, or the empire. But here we are. Yep, and that's right. A millennial man talking about ancient Rome. It just happens. It's not even something I can help. It's subconscious, and it is part of my DNA. Let's see here. Rhonda Pagan says, your opinion is fine with me. You continue to give us great feedback from what is happening in our country and the world. Well, I appreciate that, Rhonda, and it is just my opinion. And I am not an expert in the sense of economics. I'm not an expert in the sense of preparedness, right? Like I'm just a person. And I think that helps in some ways when it comes to getting my message across, because hopefully, at least to a degree, I come off as relatable because I'm just some guy who has a YouTube channel, right? Like I'm not necessarily someone who's like above and beyond the average person's understanding. I am myself an average person, so I think that puts us on a level playing field, and it allows us to have good conversation here, right? Maybe you're a Gen X that was born late. No, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm full blown millennial. I will say that, but I've had my share of wake up calls throughout my life, my share of struggles, and my share of success, which I think at a certain point all leads to being more, constitutionally minded, let's just say. So here we are. Let's see here. Silent Guard says, Sweden civs don't work more than 30 hours a week. Free healthcare, roads are well maintained, and everybody's happy. How are we in debt? Average person needs to work overtime just to survive. Well, obviously, Sweden is a completely different country. Very small, very tight immigration rules. Very strict rules when it comes to who is going to be allowed on those, government-fed programs. But also at the same time, anything that's small is easier to manage. So it's kind of like how, I could manage a convenience store pretty easy. I might have, 8 or 9 employees, and I might, have to have, a certain amount of truck drivers and everybody else to interact with. But in general, it's a small operation. But then if I move that over to, let's say, I'm trying to think of something much larger at a bigger scale. Let's just say, the offices of Google. That's how many thousands of people, not to mention remote workers, and not to mention the vast networks and outposts and everything else throughout the world. And now you're trying to manage how many people? So things fall through the cracks and expenses go up, and you know what I mean? So I think there's some reasoning behind for why that's easier for them to pull off. But I agree with you when it comes to, I shouldn't pay any taxes that, if we have enough money to give away. My taxes are too much then. You're taxing me too much money if you're giving money to Guatemala to teach people how to salsa dance, right? Like that's not, I'm being taxed too much. Not that you aren't getting enough money from me, I'm giving you too much money, right? So I think that's where things really start to fall apart. And I will say this too, based on that comment, because you mentioned overtime. I'm highly looking forward to the idea of canceling overtime taxes, because I think that's an atrocious thing that has no validation at all, and that anyone who's willing to work that hard should get the full benefit of working that hard. And so I greatly look forward to removing the overtime tax, but hopefully the income tax as a whole. I think that's where things would really take off, okay? You're not taking my guns or my pennies, says Nick. Well, keep those pennies. Remember, they're worth a lot. And in an apocalyptic scenario, your lead might need a jacket. So just keep that in mind. But I do want to say it's been a good time tonight. I think we're going to have to call it tonight. If you want to be part of the private members-only chat tonight, hit the join button down below. You can become a channel member and be part of that chat. And you'll go to my channel page, to my posts tab, which used to be the community tab, post tab, and then there you'll find my post where the link to the private live chat is. I appreciate that you guys support me, and I want to do something to say thank you, so that's why I do these. You can also join Subscribe Star, which is $5 a month, and allows you access to those as well with some additional content, and I have some new things I'm working on, and the Subscribe Star members will know things, but let's just say in this year, I am working on creating some preparedness-related products that I think will be useful and somewhat unique compared to other things that are currently out there. And Subscribe Star members are going to have the first opportunity to try these products out, to give feedback, and possibly even receive some of them, for R&D or T&E purposes. So that's something that I'm looking forward to helping those Subscribe Star supporters do in the future, and they'll be helping me as well in the sense of providing feedback and everything else. So those are things that go along with being a Subscribe Star supporter. And then honestly, the private chat is just a way to say thank you. I don't hold any information behind a paywall that's relevant or pertinent to preparedness. All we do is chat and casually discuss things. It usually devolves into gun chat, which I'm cool with. Even tonight's members only chat is called Chatty Chatty Bang Bang. And you know what? It's because I like those things, and everyone in the chat seems to too, and that's what happens. But regardless, it's not important information. It's just a hangout, and it's just my way of saying thank you to people who wanted to support the channel directly financially. But honestly, that's not required either. If you want to just support the channel and you're not in a position to do anything like that, or you just don't want to, just hitting the like button, subscribing, and sharing these videos out helps a lot more than you would think, and really makes things move forward here and grow so that I have opportunity to do more in the future. So Porky Prepper says, I pay my tribute in pennies, and I appreciate that. I will take those pennies all day long, all 500 of them. And look, we know they cost more than 2 cents to make. So maybe I'll hang on to the 500 pennies because they're really worth like 1,500 pennies, right? So that's good stuff. But anyway, you guys enjoy your night. I look forward to seeing you again next week. I'm sure we'll have plenty to discuss. And if you need anything else from me, go to magicprepper.com. There's a lot of stuff there. Discount codes, affiliate links, there's a contact form. There's a Discord server you can get to from magicprepper.com that allows you to that's free, that lets you in to talk to a bunch of weirdos like me sometimes, or some other weirdos there too, especially you, Steve, who I like, but is also weird because that's why we get along. Anyway, you know the drill. That's going to be it for Magic Prepper.